What's up everybody, it's Nick here, and today I want to talk with you about the Canon SL2. Now this camera's going on 3 years now of being an absolute powerhouse on my YouTube channel, my photography. Pretty much everything I ever do with a camera is done with this one. And I have to say, honestly, I'm very impressed with it, but what's it like using this camera in 2022? Because at the end of the day, this camera did come out in July of 2017, which is actually quite a while ago if you think about it. Which is kind of crazy because I remember when I first saw this camera was released, I saw a bunch of YouTube reviews in my feed, and I always thought to myself, I'm like, wow, that's a really cool camera. I mean, it was a cheaper DSLR, it was really small, really compact, super high quality. It shared a sensor with the Canon 80D, which was their more professional APS-C DSLR camera. First up, let's get the negatives out of the way. The photography side is very weak with this camera. It's not the actual quality of the photo, it's actually the quantity of photos I can shoot. So whenever I shoot photography, I usually like to shoot RAW. Now from the start, this always was a beginner DSLR. It had a lower end image processor, and basically the image processor is exactly what names suggest. It processes the image, photography, or video. Well, with this camera, when you're shooting RAW, you only get 5 continuous photos. That's right, 5 photos, and once you get those 5 photos, it takes forever to process those images. But if you need the maximum frame rates, I believe it's 5 frames per second with this camera, you have to use JPEG. Now the problem with JPEG is it's not as high quality, it's nowhere near as flexible in post-production. The other drawback for this camera is actually the video side of things. Basically the only thing you will get is 1080p 60 frames a second, 1080p 30 frames a second, or 1080p 24. Which when I first got this camera back in the very beginning of 2019, that was perfectly acceptable. 1080p was still a pretty good high quality file size, especially for internet sharing. But the big problem is the 60 FPS. I mean, most of the time that's enough for me. I don't like to do a whole lot of slow-mo stuff. There has been a few times I wish I had 120 so I can get extra slow and cinematic shots. Another small thing is where the microphone port is located on this camera. So I usually always have a Rode mic on top. My go-to is Rode Video Mic Go. But when it's plugged in, I can't flip the LCD because it's right in the way. And that's really annoying, especially when I'm out like run and gun kind of style. Like I just flick on the camera, I need to get a shot. I mean, it's not a huge deal. After using it for so long, I've learned how to kind of work around it. But with all the negatives out of the way, let's talk about some positives of this camera. Starting off with the photo quality, I mean, it is actually really good. It has a 24 megapixel CMOS sensor, which to this day holds up great. It produces bright and vibrant pictures that are very detailed, they're very sharp, and you pair it with the right lens and it looks just absolutely phenomenal. Some of the best pictures I've personally taken have been with the SL2, and the CR2 RAW codec is very powerful, it's very versatile, very flexible. That's the reason I'm always shooting it, is because there's just so much I can manipulate in post-production to get the exact look I want in my photos. Now disclaimer, shooting RAW does not mean you can be lazy with things like exposure and whatnot. There's been plenty of times where I've been able to make a photo look a lot better. Basically, let's say I'm shooting something dark against a really bright background. With the RAW codec, I'm kind of exposed in the middle, so that way the sky isn't completely blown out, but that subject isn't completely lost in the dark. Just a nice sweet spot. There is limits to this, obviously, because if you really crank it, then you might get some grain and weird artifacting. So moving on to video, because I'm more of a video person, the video quality straight out of the camera isn't bad at all. Now, if you compare this camera to a modern mirrorless DSLR camera, you're definitely going to notice a difference. This camera shoots with an 8-bit color depth. That means this camera only captures about 16 million different shades of colors, which is quite a lot, don't get me wrong, and for internet content like this, that's plenty, that's more than enough, it looks great. A lot more consumer cameras are being able to shoot 10-bit, and now this means they'll actually be able to capture 1 billion different colors and shades, which the more colors you can capture, the more cinematic and natural an image will look. It'll just overall have a better quality to it. The dynamic range is going to be a little bit better no matter what. Now, one of the biggest problems I have shooting video with this camera still is the fact its max resolution is 1080p. Lower resolutions are being phased out. Heck, on YouTube, 720p doesn't even have its HD badge anymore, only 1080. That's the main reason all these big YouTubers will shoot with Red Cinema cameras so they can get 8K video, because as of now, yes, that's way overkill, but in 5 years, that footage is still going to be relevant, it's still going to be the correct size. In 5 years from now, this 1080p footage is going to be way too small. Blowing it up to fit your 4K timeline to go on your 10-bit YouTube display, this 8-bit 1080 is just not going to look as good. It's going to stick out like a sore thumb. The menu system of this camera is actually still great. Canon has mastered their menu system. I don't know what it is. I personally just love it. All their cameras, they're so intuitive to use. They're so easy to use. Out of the box, this camera actually had a beginner mode. I turned that off because I knew my way around cameras. But if you don't, that's a great way to start. It teaches you all about the different settings. Then you can flick it back to normal mode. So after all this, would I still recommend you go out and buy this camera in 22? Well, the short answer is no. I can't recommend this camera. It's just getting too outdated. It's still a really good camera, but for someone who is in the market for a DSLR, I can't recommend this camera if you're going to be making internet content. For photography, it's still a decent choice. Just beware of that continuous shooting limit. But if you're making video, I would say start looking for something different. Maybe the Canon M50 Mark II, or if you're not into Canon cameras, Sony has mirrorless options in the same price point. When this camera first came out, out. The body only was $550 and the whole kit was $700. I got it for $400, the whole kit, so it was refurbished and it was on sale. And if you still want a DSLR camera, the Canon T8i is decent. It's more modern, it's upgraded. It's around the same price point as this camera was when it was brand new. So will I upgrade this camera? Eventually, yes, because obviously cameras don't last forever, they get outdated. Probably not anytime soon, but the cameras I've kind of been eyeing up is the Canon 90D. It's their more professional APS-C DSLR camera, but it has modern features, 4K, better colors. It's a beefier body, it has better photography spec. Or I might switch to a mirrorless camera, who knows? But the point is, this SL2 has been a powerhouse of a camera. I've taken this camera through many different weather conditions, from really hot and dry to really hot and humid, to the middle of winter with freezing cold conditions, to a rainstorm. This camera isn't technically weatherproof, it still just keeps chugging. I mean, Canon really does know how to build a decent, reliable DSLR. But that's it for me, guys. Think well if you watched the video. Comment down below what camera you're using, and a camera you'd potentially like to upgrade to someday. Make sure to like and subscribe if you are new. I will see you guys next time. Peace out.